Hi Nikita, how are you?
Hi, Arvind. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good too, thank you. And thanks for taking the time to do this debrief. I appreciate it.
Excited to be here.
Right. So basically, Nikita, what I'd like to do is sort of unpack your application journey in terms of getting into LBS, which is no easy feat, to sort of give, let's say, future applicants an idea of what it takes to get into one of the world's most competitive programs. Right. So broadly, as an agenda, we'll start with talking about your background, your experience, where you're from, what kind of professional experience you had, and then touch into aspects like why you want to do an MBA or why you wanted to do an MBA, especially at LBS, and then talk in a bit more detail about the application process itself, the various components, CV, essays. LBS has a really big set of questions right on the application, and the interview process, what it was like, any insights you had, and any tips you have for candidates, right? So that's sort of like the broader agenda. But if you want to sort of deep dive into any, as and when we cover a certain topic, that's perfectly fine. So with that, Nikita, could you start with talking a bit about yourself, where you're from, what your background is, what your work experience is, and so on.
Yeah. Okay. So I've spent most of my life in Bangalore, and I think I started thinking about an MBA right at the time of my BTech. So I did my BTech in a course called Production and Industrial Engineering, and what attracted me to that course was the whole concept of supply chain and process optimization. So after getting admitted to my BTech degree, I chose to do an internship as well, where I worked in a warehouse. And I think that's where my interest started getting sparked for the whole process optimization supply chain thing. I got the opportunity to make process flows and even discuss with new employees on the process flows of the warehouse. And I was getting more and more interested in it every day. My course also helped me through this throughout. And after 4 years, I think I knew that I wanted to do my work in supply chain, and I was lucky enough to get placed at Flipkart, one of the top e-commerce companies in India. And my Flipkart journey was honestly even more reinforcing of this idea. I started working at a warehouse where I was managing so many employees, about 100 plus employees, unskilled workers, and 5 employees of my own. And there I built my leadership acumen as well. And it was absolutely interesting. And I realized I wanted to do more. So I moved to a central role here in Flipkart where I was working more with numbers while also looking at pan India operations, that is 31 plus warehouses and 100 plus hubs. So here I realized that this is where like the whole supply chain, I was in the midst of supply chain, learning everything I could about it. And I realized I wanted to do more, where I wanted to look at business as a whole. Around that time, my brother did his MBA from Canada, and he told me about the amazing experience he had in terms of networking, in terms of everything there. So I think that in that process of understanding how much an MBA can help my already existing knowledge of supply chain, I decided that that's when I wanted to do an MBA.
That's interesting. I mean, in terms of, let's say, your work experience, I think let's say, the positive or the great thing is you've had an interesting mix of projects, right? So, can you talk a bit about, let's say, that part, the interesting work that you've done at Flipkart, and B, also one of the, let's say, perceived challenges is work experience is a bit on the lower side, right? Especially if you look at a school like LBS, where folks with 6, 7 years of experience tend to be the median. And this is also a question that I receive a lot from, let's say, younger applicants like you, right, who have, say, 3 or 4 years of experience at the time of applying. Is how is that sort of, A, was that a challenge? And B, sort of, if so, how did the rest of the application and the package sort of help you offset it?
Okay, so regarding my projects, I think being able to switch roles in within the same company and even getting a promotion helped me sort of increase my scope and the number of people and projects I was leading. So when I was working in the warehouse, I was doing day-to-day work where I was looking at numbers and metrics. When I moved to a central role, I started looking entirely into high level projects where I would choose a project that would impact 31 warehouses and the entire basically pan India operations. And after that, I got promoted to a manager. And here I was able to work more with cross functional teams. So, along with supply chain, I started working with the business development team, with the category team, and with the tech and product teams as well. So this sort of mix helped me gain a basic overall level of understanding of business as a whole, which really helped me in my MBA story. So coming to the question of years of experience, even though I had just 3 or 4, it was definitely scary applying since the average is much higher. But I think talking to you, you helped me understand that my story itself is something that is really inspirational on its own. That I made my story saying supply chain is something that I followed through on, and now I want to expand more on the overall business knowledge. Plus, being getting the chance to lead people in my roles was something that I was able to add to my MBA story.
Right, right, right. Can you talk about your GRE journey? Sort of, how was your preparation like, and any insights that you have on the GRE itself?
Okay, so my GRE story is actually a bit of an emotional one. I started preparing for my GMAT or GRE around the time of 2024 September. That's when my dad was in the hospital because of a heart bypass. And at the time, I chose to stay with him through the nights while my mom was with him in the mornings. And in the night, my job was to just stay awake. So my point was, I took and I started just preparing for GRE in that time because nothing else was distracting me enough. I was able to just sit down and start prepping for GRE. So through that, I totally wrote my GRE 3 times. After my second attempt is when I came to you with a score of 324, which was definitely on the lower end of the average, which was something that was actually discouraging me to apply. But I think talking to you, I was able to see that there are other parts of my application that I can focus on. And I think through it all, I did attempt for another one which didn't work out. But even with my GRE score of 324, I was able to apply and get it.
Right. Right. I mean, I think that's a good point. Is the score is one? I mean, it is an important part, but it's not the only part of your application, especially for a school like LBS that does ask for a lot of other components, right? Whether that's through your CV or the essays, or even through your recommenders, letters of recommendations, and so on. So on that note, can you talk a bit about sort of extracurriculars, the importance of extracurriculars, and key activities that you were or you are involved in, that how and how you kind of positioned it on the application?
So, one of my biggest extracurriculars is dance. I've been dancing ever since my 12th grade, and I had positions of leadership both in my 12th standard and in my college, where I was heading a dance club there. That was the biggest one that I had mentioned. And during in my MBA application and in my interview, I mentioned this as a point of leadership, where I said, starting from a young age, I was able to lead a team with an aspect of dance. And also, while dancing and focusing on extracurriculars, I ensured that my academics did not stray. So, this was something that was really helpful, and honestly, that connected with my interviewer really well. She was absolutely fascinated by it. Apart from dance, I had also done piano, and I had worked in 2 charity organizations, which also I put across as the way of giving back to the community, something that I wanted to do even post this after joining college. So I feel extracurriculars, while it's not a mandatory, it definitely helps you build your story better.
Right, right, absolutely. So let's talk about LBS, right? And that was your number one choice, right? When we were discussing schools. So what are some of the aspects of the school besides the brand, which is obviously it's a great school, big brand globally. And you had also interacted with a number of folks, right, whether that's AdCom or students, alumni, etc. So can you talk a bit about the specific nuances or aspects of the school that resonated with you and that sort of made it your first choice?
Yeah, like you rightly mentioned, the first thing was, of course, the brand name that attracted me to it. But I think the next step, which you had pushed me to do, was talk to a few students about LBS. And I spoke to seniors and the AdCom. And I think one of the first things that amazed me was how almost every senior I reached out to was immediately reciprocative in talking to me. I think they had about half an hour discussions each where they answered almost every single one of my questions, and they were excitedly explaining about the college and how the community that the college has built is so amazing. So when I was applying, I think one of the things I was worried about was that in India, there is an entire placement process where companies come to the college, which is not something that's there abroad. But when I spoke to LBS students, they spoke about their career center, where it's literally a mentor mentee process where you're assigned so many seniors who help you through the entire interview process, help you network, and improve everything so much better. And I think one thing I heard from almost every LBS student is that these are going to be the best 2 years of your life, where they spoke about so many aspects, clubs, treks, projects, everything is with the community that you build is something that's amazing. And one of my top reasons for doing an MBA is networking. So when even before joining a college, if I was able to already build a relatively good network, I felt like that is definitely something that I want to do. And I think this is something that I want to talk about is my interview. So my interview went so great with my interviewer, where we spoke for about 2 hours, where it was just honestly an amazing discussion. There were very difficult questions in between, which I was able to answer, but it was such a beautiful interaction that I had with her. And 2 weeks after, so we got our admit about months later, a month or a month and a half later, she messaged me after I got my admit, congratulating me with a long message, telling me how this is going to be amazing and I'm so excited for you. And honestly, at that point, I realized that this community is something that I definitely want to join.
Right, right. That's a great point, actually, right? I mean, because that's something that I also hear from a lot of folks that both apply to LBS and that have made it to LBS, that are say, students or alumni. Is it's kind of like the close knit college experience, which is possible through 2 years. I mean, there's a flexible exit point, but let's say 2 years is because you spend a lot of time with people around you in a very close setting, and that in a way allows or in some forms even forces you to interact with people, and people not just having similar backgrounds but also from various different parts of life, and whether that's through clubs, treks, or even the social clubs, right? I think there's a bunch of clubs that they have, which will really allow you to form really good bonds with folks that are part of your class.
Yeah, and I think when I discussed with them, the more I spoke to them, my why LBS reason was getting really reinforced. By the time that I'd reached the application, I had a really good answer. And MBA is something that's a very competitive thing. I've spoken to my brother and a bunch of other seniors from different colleges who mentioned how competitive it is in the college. So if you have a close-knit community with that competitiveness, I think that's something that would really help me through my journey.
So let's switch gears a bit, Nikita. Let's talk about the application process itself. Could you talk about the steps that we followed and any insights, also anything that you recollect or anything that you want to share with applicants on whether that's the CV, whether that's the essays, whether that's the interviews. Maybe we'll go to interviews in a bit, but let's focus for now on the CV and the essays. LBS has a plethora of essays. So any insights or any sort of recollections from our working process?
Just to clarify, would you like it about the process with you or just specific to what the process was?
Yeah, both is fine.
Okay. So I think for me, one thing I really want to mention is that when I started my process, LBS was something that I did not think I would even could apply for because it was out of reach. And I to date, I remember that discussion with you where when I was choosing colleges, I said LBS is there, but I don't think I can do it because it's too difficult and I don't have a good profile. And you stopped me and said, no, tell me why you don't think you have a good profile. And you helped me understand why LBS would actually be a good fit for me, and there's no harm in trying. And I think after that, when we started the process, like you mentioned, the essays were so many. And one of the best advice that you had given me was to treat every question on the application as an essay. So most people just take the essay topics and spend all their time on that and treat the rest of the application as just an application. But I think with you, you had me write every question on a sheet and we went through so many iterations of a simple question like what was your background, or what was your family process growing up, or did you speak to any alumni. And I think while that was so important to the application, that also was so, it was so eye-opening for me about myself. Like I had doubts about an MBA. When you start the process, when you put in the funds, you put in the time and the effort, you're always questioning it along the way. But going through the LBS application, I think it was really eye-opening for me, where I understood myself better, and I created my journey along the way, answering every single question. And it was so many. I think it was close to 18 questions, if I'm not wrong. And we went through about three, four iterations of each. But at the end of that application process, I think my story was so set that when we came to the interview, I had my story ready. I had my answers ready for everything. And if anything, I had to make sure that I put it within a time limit and I didn't go into speaking about them too much, because I had so much to say about myself and about my journey.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think especially with LBS, as you said, it's the application is kind of like a canvas, right? I mean, there's so many aspects of you as an applicant that, when used well, is a great opportunity. Of course, it's time consuming, it's sometimes painful, but it does give you on the flip side that opportunity to really bring in very different aspects of you, which I think is some applicants may not spend as much time, and I think that's a big mistake on the overall application as such, right? Not just the main one or two essays, because when you go to interviews, which again is a great point that you brought up, you will be asked these questions. Maybe the interviewer has gone through those or not, but they are likely to hit on some of the topics like what do you do outside of work, why you do it, and things like that. So on the interview, Nikita, could you from what you recall, what were some of the topics or questions that were covered? You mentioned it was a long conversation. Any sort of anything that you can share on what you discussed and any insights that you have on that?
So, with in my interview with Priyanka, I think so. Starting from the initial process of working with you for the interview, I remember my mocks with you were were very insightful. Where it was like I mentioned, I had my story set and I was able to answer them, and you were able to tweak the right answer. So I had like sort of a script set on what I wanted to say. When I started talking to her, I remember expecting it to be this formal, important discussion where I had to make sure that I did not stray. But she was someone who made my entire situation very comfortable. Like, while she asked me very difficult questions, it was more of a discussion, and I could see that she was responding more to my honesty rather to my scripted answers. Because when we started, of course, the first question was tell me about yourself. And I answered my scripted tell me about yourself as best as I could. And then she started deep diving into the questions, and I could see that her curiosity peaked every time I was honest about myself. I remember specifically this one question which she asked me about women in the workplace, where she mentioned, so I had mentioned that I was one of the only women in my workplace, especially in the warehouse. I was one of three. And there it was really difficult to sort of make my name there. And but I fought for it, and I put my heart and soul into working for that. And she asked me straight up why. She said, do you think it is because of being a woman, and how would you get out of it? I think being able to answer that question very frankly, saying definitely that it is, but there are other aspects of it, I was able to sort of build a better connection with her. And further, she asked me more questions about why an MBA. And I think when I mentioned that I wanted to do more about a business and eventually start my own business, she even asked me why don't you just start it right away? Why do you think an MBA is going to give you that? But I was telling her honestly about the way I work, about my leadership style, about my need for networking beyond just India, beyond just my current career, where I only know people who work in supply chain and in Flipkart. So I can say that one of the most important things that everybody should do in an interview is, for one, make sure that you build your own story and you answer as honestly as you can, because that's what they realize where you are, and they realize when you answer properly.
Right, right. Yeah, great point. Especially for LBS, because I mean, the interviewer is an alum, right? So he or she has been through the process. They've gone to the school. They've had that experience, which is maybe sometimes slightly different from, let's say, an AdCom interview, right? Because somebody that has gone through the journey is likely to, let's say, figure out if someone is not being as authentic, or they're just saying something because the school wants to hear it.
Yeah. And I think so. While I was excited to talk to a previous LBS student, so the minute I found out who my interviewer is, I was doing a deep dive on her. I was checking her out on LinkedIn, and I found a profile of her on Poets and Quants. And I was actually quite intimidated because she had such a beautiful journey, where I think she spoke about how she overcame difficulties in her life, and she was working through, I think she went on treks, and she was starting her own business. So I was really intimidated, but somehow I think after my discussions with you, I was able to turn that into a sort of curiosity, where my questions to her at the end of it, where you said, do you have any questions for me? I had genuine questions for her. I actually wanted to know so much about her journey. So that's also something that's really exciting when you're talking to a previous LBS student.
So I think one topic before we wrap it up, and I ask you for your tips for applicants, is, so you were managing a high pressure job, right? It was hectic. I know that you had a lot of things at work, and then obviously the application has its own components and interviews and so on. So how did you manage it, right? I mean, what was your let's say strategies, or what were the things that you did to make sure that you were able to balance both?
Okay, so to give you a bit of information on how my work was, I think during the application process, which was around August, September, is the time in India where Flipkart has their biggest sales. And so that generally meant people working 7 days a week, including weekends. And I wasn't even allowed to take leaves. So I had taken the decision not to take a sabbatical and work through it, but it was really taxing on me. I think there were days where all I did was sit in my room, work, and then work on my application nonstop. So when it comes to tips, I think one thing would be to have like a proper checklist. I think going through each process one by one, where you're taking the time out to do it yourself, where so I remember the application. We said we were going to go through one iteration, and you gave me a sort of deadline. Reaching that deadline was something that was extremely scary for me. And every time I sat to do it with my burnout, I was just completely lost. So I think first preparing a checklist, and the second thing I honestly appreciated was that I was able to ask you for help. Whenever I got stuck, I think I remember just getting on a phone call with you and sometimes and saying, I'm stuck on this question. And you helped me through it without sort of writing it for me, which made me feel like I told my own story. And I think the only way you can avoid burnout is by asking for help when you need it. From you, from my brother and my cousin sister sometimes, and even from other LBS students, is the way that I was able to get through it.
So any other tips for applicants, particularly folks looking at LBS? What are things that you think they should do, they should not do when it comes to the application process, whether that's essays, interviews, etc.?
So I think first, of course, I think say this to everyone right now, is that treat your entire LBS application like an essay. Like every single question is extremely important, even if it's just 100-word essay on your hobbies. Write it, go through it, write it from the perspective of another person reading it, and if possible, take somebody else's opinion as well. Because the more insights you get from others, you don't always have to take their answers, but you can always work on it better. That's the first one. Second one would be to take your time in choosing your college. So, this is something I wanted to bring up. When I was choosing my college, I think I had two, three brainstorming sessions with you. And at the end of it, I still hadn't decided a college, although you had given me such good insights. And I think I really want to mention how I did this because I remember this one day where I was frustrated and I said, I don't know what to do. And I spoke to my brother, and what we ended up doing was we made an Excel sheet and we made a matrix where we said, these are the colleges, these are the aspects, and we pointed it because I had shortlisted my colleges to seven, but I had to further shortlist it to three, and I didn't know how to do that. So I put this, I literally put a matrix, I put points, and I took an average, and I said, okay, these are my colleges, let me go for these. So I think taking that time out to understand why you want each college, understanding what aspects are important to you. Like for me, it was finances, closeness to family, the geography, the brand name, everything. Like very honestly, just put it across to your consultant and sort of take the time out in choosing what you're doing, why you're doing it. And it's okay if it takes a little longer. I think one thing that I put on myself was this unnecessary pressure to finish it as fast as I can because I said round one is the only way to go. But like I was mentioning, I think there are so many round two admits as well. And in fact, one of the round two admits, she'd been working for 5 years to get into LBS, where she said she'll eventually apply. And she still said, no, I'm not ready in round one. And I'm only going to apply in round two. But that's okay as long as you take that time to understand what you're doing and why you're applying. So that's something that's really good. And I think my last point would be to be honest. If I worked with someone, I think choosing you as a consultant was an amazing decision because you helped me write my own story rather than writing it for me. Which, honestly, at the end of it, even now, I'm so confident about why I want to do an MBA because I was able to work through that process with you. There are a lot of students I've heard who've had people write their entire essays for them, and when it comes to interview, they're lost. Like when they put across with difficult questions, they don't know how to answer it because you can script it as many times as you want, but you need an honest answer as to why you're doing an MBA. I think taking that time out to work on it yourself and be honest at every step of your application and your interview is something that really helps.
Right, right. Yeah, that's great advice. And thank you again, Nikita, for joining in. All the best for LBS. And London is a great city. Make sure you have a good time there. And I wish you the best for your journey ahead.
Thank you so much, Amit. Thanks for all the help.